Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Going to be looking at the chassis paint and fitting those new shock absorbers. But before I do that, I really need to see the condition of the original springs that are still fitted to the car. So I need to get it up in the air, get the wheels off. So that's the car up in the air with the wheels off. There's a couple of things I want to mention before I start taking the suspension off. Okay, the first thing is I want to withdraw the complete strut, including the spring and the top mount. And to do that, I will actually unbolt these nuts here off the top mount. I won't be undoing the center part here off the top mount, as if I do that, the spring will be released. So not all vehicles have adjustable camber. On some vehicles, they use what they call an eccentric cam washer. It's like a washer with an offset hole, and this is to bring the wheel in and out for the adjustment of the camber. A lot of vehicles though, these are just bolts and they're just fixed and you can't adjust it. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is if you go ahead and remove your shock absorber off an older car and it does have adjustable camber, you'll then lose the position where it originally was. Although saying that, in the same breath, if you're doing any suspension replacements, it's always best to get your tracking, your camber and all the geometry set at the same time afterwards. So you might be wondering why I'm going on about wheel camber. It is actually quite important. On a normal road car, you want the contact surface of the tyre to be relatively flat to the road. Something like this here would be a negative camber, and something like this here would be a positive camber. So if you have a negative camber on a normal road going car, you can see here that you're just going to wear the inside of the tyre if it's not set correctly. So believe it or not, there are actually some performance benefits from running a slightly negative camber if you have a performance car, but I'm not going to go into this as this car is only going to be used on normal roads and normal driving. So as I mentioned before, when playing around with suspension components, and this includes changing bushes and suspension parts, it can actually affect the tracking. After all, you want the vehicle to be tracking in a straight line. So if you imagine this being the front wheel and you have something called a toe in and a toe out. So what you want is the wheels to actually be going straight. Having them towing in and towing out can cause all sorts of tyre wears, but as well as that, it can really affect the performance of the car if you get this wrong. So this particular car has trailing arm suspension, 2 individual arms at the back with a spring and a shock absorber. Normally what you can do is remove the shock absorber, drop the arm down and remove the spring. You may have to strip it down more depending on the vehicle. Tracking, things like that are not normally an adjustable thing on the rear suspension. Well, that's enough gassing. I'll probably do a video covering suspension geometry and the importance of it at a later date. But for the time being, let's get the suspension off. So it's just as well I'm replacing the shock absorbers on this car. You can see there where the shock absorber is actually wet. This is the oil leaking out the shock absorber. As you can imagine, if you only had a spring on this vehicle, the car would be bouncing down the road with no dampening effect at all. So shock absorbers are super important. And in this case, this one's lost its oil and it's gone soft. That's dangerous. So here's the near side front shock. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the top mount so I can take off the spring. One thing that's worth mentioning, it is actually spring loaded. So if you're worried about it, use your coil spring compressors just to hold this spring down, take the tension off it, then you can easily remove the mount. Okay, that's the front springs removed. I'm just checking them to make sure that they don't have any broken ends or any missing coils. I mean, normally with springs over years of use, they get soft and saggy. So I do realise that I will be changing them in the future, I guess. But for the time being, I would like to reuse these. Yet again, I'm just checking these rear springs just to make sure they don't have any broken coils. They look pretty good actually, very scuzzy. Oh, I'm not entirely sure what that is. Some kind of alien egg. So I'm pretty happy with the overall condition of these springs. I do realise that they are old and I may have to replace them. But for the time being, I'd like to use them on the new shock absorbers. But they're very scuzzy looking, so let's give them a clean and give them a paint. So I've just given the springs a clean in some soapy water, and then on top of that what I've done is I've just keyed them up and removed the flaky bits of paint with an old 60 grit. Okay, so I've just applied a couple of coats of metal paint to these springs, and I must admit they look a lot better. Unfortunately, what I realised while I was painting is that the compressor that I've got is so small that where I'm using the air, it's struggling to top itself up fast. So here's the compressor that I'm using. Unfortunately, the receiver tank is so small, it's no good for painting. I've got a couple of options here. I can add a sub tank, another receiver tank, to this compressor, which may help, or I may be looking at buying a new compressor again. Anyway, I know you guys would be super excited if I did a video on watching paint dry, but it's not going to happen. See you next time. Cheers. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention. The metal paint I was using, I did actually thin it down so it went through the gun a bit better, about 5% thinners.